Thank you, Sammy and Eric at Topra for hosting us today. Welcome everyone to this webinar delivered by Doraworth Languages Limited and sponsored by Topra. As mentioned, the format for today's webinar will be a discussion between myself, Craig Brown, Chief Marketing Officer, and Eleni Andreou, Director of Business Development. I'll let Eleni introduce herself a little later on in the session. I myself have been working in the translation industry for around 10 years, editing and then managing translation projects, first at RWS Medical Translation Division and later at Doraworth Languages, where I now primarily head up our marketing activities. We'll begin with an introduction to our company and some background on our work on translations for regulatory affairs, and then present you with some advice and case studies for approaching the translations when submitting drugs for approval in the EU. Despite now being headquartered in a third country, the UK, we continue our long history of work on EU marketing authorisations and have plenty of advice for you in tackling this relatively small but important factor in a successful marketing authorisation application. After that summary, we'll open the floor and answer any questions that may have arisen during the discussion. Our contact details will be on screen in case you prefer to contact us directly. So DWL is a specialist provider of translation solutions to the life sciences industry. We serve clinical research organisations, pharmaceutical and medical device companies, universities, and regulatory consultancies, among others. Our namesake and founder, Doraworth, was born in Moscow in 1916. She left her native Russia during the 1919 counter-revolution, moved to Warsaw with her family before settling in Danzig until the mid-30s. Dora came to England in 1935, able to speak Russian, French, German, Polish, and English, and she capitalised on her passion for languages, working at the Daily Express during the Second World War, monitoring speeches by Hitler and Stalin. In 1962, she founded Eurolink Limited, a translation agency which in 1964 became Doraworth Languages Limited. The secret to her success was a combination of linguistic ability and business sense harnessed by great people skills. Now, as the regulatory framework for EU drug submissions has evolved in Europe, DWL has developed in-house expertise to support our pharmaceutical clients with new product submissions and variations. Over the last 20 years or so, we've carved a niche for ourselves, translating and updating product information for centralised, decentralised and national procedures. Today, Dora's son, Sam Worth, is at the helm as our CEO, and in 2020, we recorded our most successful year of sales by respecting our core set of values, which are in-house expertise in medical and regulatory affairs. This is headed up by Dr. Ian Matheson, our medical director. A friendly, personalised approach to frequently very complex customer and national requirements. We offer a single point of contact for each customer for all translation requests, and we maintain a global supply chain of experienced freelance linguists. This was, of course, tested last year at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we surveyed our teams during 2020 and can report that our suppliers and the medical translation industry in general are resilient and optimistic about 2021. Our project management teams are from diverse linguistic backgrounds and from within the translation industry itself, and they go the extra mile for our customers, which is of particular importance during the processes that we'll describe in a moment. We're also committed to selective application of digital translation tools, and we have a roadmap towards adoption of neural machine translation technology in 2021. This point is important because technologies are disrupting aspects of the translation industry, but with patient safety and corporate success resting on the accuracy of our work, we only adopt tech that's tried and tested to deliver safe and compliant translations. And finally, we're audited to the ISO 9001 standard for quality management. Now, a priority for us, as well as maintaining a positive reputation among the regulatory affairs community, which we're of course proud to have, is to maintain a positive reputation among the translator community, on whom we rely to do the most fundamental aspect of our work, obviously the translations. Now, you, the customer, are a subject matter expert, so you'd therefore expect documents to be translated by the same, and that's why we work with translators who in most cases reside in the country in which their native language is spoken, but also have experience working in medical professions. Again, this is an important point to bear in mind later when we talk about our role in the submission process. Translations for marketing authorization applications are where medical knowledge, linguistic skills, and awareness of terminology and layout conventions combine, often under highly pressured timelines. Many translators who work on these types of projects often have a postgraduate level education in scientific or medical disciplines, experience working in public health, or regulatory knowledge gained from working within the pharmaceutical industry itself. Those are some typical examples of their experience, but we even work with one medical translator who flies emergency helicopters for a living, and even some founding members of the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, of which DWL is a corporate member. Over the course of supporting our customers with many hundreds of drug submissions, we've seen a wide range of approaches taken by companies on the path to a successful marketing authorization. So for the next segment of the webinar, we'll give you some details on these approaches, of course, without sharing any confidential information, and some pitfalls that you should be aware of and avoid when addressing the need for translated product information. So first of all, let's clarify what we mean by the centralized procedure in terms of translation needs. So with that as a basis, we'll then describe some of the pitfalls you may encounter. When we refer to product information from here on in, we're talking specifically about annexes 1 to 4, including the SPC, labelling, and package leaflet. These are translated in full for a first marketing authorization where no comparator or originator product is available, or they're updated for subsequent variations. And when we refer to LSPs, we're of course talking about language service providers, another more general term for translation agencies. So as you can see on screen now, at day 1, you may have a first draft English PI. At this point, you can begin to plan the linguistic stages of your application. Planning ahead always ensures a smooth path to submission, particularly if you need to schedule in-country reviews by local affiliates. And you'll see how important that is later on in the process when the deadlines inevitably get tighter. Between day 1 and day 120 or day 121, you'll need to ensure your PI is compliant with EMA QRD templates and guidelines, as well as standard EDQM and MEDRA terminology. Always better to iron out any non-compliances before they're translated 24 times later on. At day 150, you can give the green light to begin translating an English PI into the 24 languages required for each centralized MA. Any updates to the English PI during the period between day 150 and day 210 need to be reflected in the target language translations. Again, it's a good idea to have 24 up-to-date translations before CHMP opinion and the 5-day window. The 5-day window begins on day 210. This falls on a Thursday, but our experience tells us that this can be a Friday or a Monday or even Tuesday, the day of submission. So the actual window can be smaller. You've got to ensure that any updates to the English PI following a positive or conditional opinion from the CHMP are incorporated in the 24 translated versions by day 215. So yes, depending on when opinion is received, this deadline can be tight. The translated PIs are then distributed via UDRA-link to member state health authorities for review, and by day 229, they'll make available to you any comments on their local language version of the PI. It's worth noting that comments can mean comments in English, they can mean comments in a translated language, it could just mean changes to the translations. Sometimes they're not even tracked. So your LSP should then review any of these comments from member states for accuracy, QRD compliance and consistency, and of course come to agreement with local member states health authorities wherever possible. The most efficient way to approach this step is to allow the LSP to liaise directly with individual member state health authorities to reach agreement. They should then complete all relevant sections of the QRD Form 2 for you. Finally, by day 235, you'll need a submission-ready package of annotated, clean and bookmarked PDF files, QRD Form 2, any correspondence with local member state health authorities, and the submission checklist ready to send to the EMA. So that's a summary of the translation activities you may need to engage in. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Eleni Andreou, who will tell you a little bit about her professional background in this area. And then we can begin a discussion about the varying approaches to handling product information that we see on a regular basis. Hi, Eleni.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you also to Topra for hosting us and offering us the opportunity to discuss translations for regulatory affairs. I am the Business Development Director at Dorworth Languages. I am a trained translator myself with over 10 years of experience in translation and project management within the life sciences sector. And after having served some of the world's leading pharma and medical devices companies, I have recently taken over the business development activities at Dorworth Languages, where our utmost goal is to provide highest quality translation solutions to our global clients.
Thanks, Eleni. So as you say, you've been handling submissions for our clients for a number of years now, and we know that there are obviously differences in how they treat the translation of these documents. So how different is the approach per company, and on what do these differences depend usually?
Well, everyone is different and each company has their internal procedures in place. So there's a great variety of approaches in handling a submission, which could depend on the technology our customers have in place, their experience in the process, dealing with the EMA, with the member states, and even with an LSP. The extent to which they want to be hands-on during the process, and of course their internal procedures and workflows. Each company has different SOPs to follow as well. So all these do affect the approach they will choose to take.
Okay, so with that in mind, we've got a list of challenges here. What would you say is the biggest challenge, the biggest stumbling block here when approaching the translation stage of a drug submission?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges when it comes to translations are, of course, the tight timelines that are usually the case in centralized procedures. But we believe that with flexibility and positive relationships with translators, this shouldn't really become challenging for our customers.
So logically, starting early is a benefit, but how early can translations start, do you think?
Translations can generally start as early as day 150 when it comes to a new submission for a full translation of a product information into 24 languages, but could also start later in the process if we're dealing with a variation or with minimal changes to the English file. An early start will make sure that there is enough time for any possible questions on the English, like, for example, unclear passages that could be misinterpreted during translation. So it would really make sense not to multiply any potential problems into 24 languages.
So is there any leeway at all on these deadlines, on EMA deadlines?
Usually not, but we have had the odd case where we received official extensions from the EMA. There was, for example, one instance when we received new text of approximately 1,500 words on the day of submission, so on a Tuesday, to translate into 24 languages. Delivering all the translations on the same day was unrealistic and could also prove to be unsafe for the patient if it was translated under that pressure and with no time for additional revisions and QC. So the EMA did grant an extension on that exceptional case. This can happen, but it is not common.
Okay, understood. So you mentioned technology as well is another factor that affects your client approaches. What's technology clash, and isn't technology always a benefit?
Technology can, of course, help the management of product information, especially now that we use computer-aided translation tools, the so-called CAT tools. But it can also create problems during the process in some important ways. For example, we would advise everyone to make sure that they use up-to-date Windows and Microsoft Office version when handling product information. We have noticed that sharing documents between users that work with different Office versions can cause clashes, which could then result in untracked formatting changes in the file. At best, this could be just a simple change in like font size or style, but at worst, it could lead in text being replaced by illegible symbols, tables being misplaced, etc. So when submitting product information to the member states for linguistic review, just bear in mind that if someone in the document chain, including even the member states themselves, if they're using a different Office version, especially older ones, it may introduce compliance issues, usually relating to tables, font sizes, spacing, etc. Yeah, so do encourage anyone who handles these documents within your company to always implement any software updates and use the correct versions.
Mm-hmm. And any other ways technology errors can creep in apart from Microsoft Office?
I know it may seem obvious, but conversion from PDF can cause several problems further down the line. Now, a Word document, even if it is properly formatting to all the QRD requirements and converted to a bookmarked PDF, will become unstable and potentially very difficult to manage if converted back to Word, including all sorts of fonts and format problems. So there can be a lot to do to bring product information in line with QRD formatting conventions. So if you inherit, for example, a product for which only the PDF is available, that could happen with originators and comparative products. Just try to have your translation provider bring it back up to scratch so future approvals can go smoothly.
And again, I guess any errors in the file at this stage are just going to be multiplied into other languages, aren't they, if they're not noticed early enough?
That's right. Yes, always.
So, yeah. So we've got timelines and technology as challenges. Anything else you find that poses a challenge to a successful submission? What about communication breakdown?
We can't stress enough the importance of communication with your LSP. Assumptions are frequently made by our newer customers about the level of support that they need when they request translations for product information. For example, what QRD requirements they need to follow, the quality of the English document and the quality of the existing translations, or even if they require their affiliates to be involved in the process. We ask our customers to fill out a submission-related questionnaire for any new requests, which will help them give us the necessary information so we better understand their requirements and decide which workflow would be most suitable for each case. Without this information, there are too many variables at play that could, of course, jeopardize the submission. So as we will see later in the webinar, there are also multiple different approaches taken by our customers. So there's really no one-size-fits-all approach. Now, when we speak about communication with your LSP, we also refer to being available for your LSP for any questions that might come from translators or even from your affiliates. These could come at all stages during a submission. So again, it is very important that you're available for questions, at least during critical time windows, for example, like following the CHMP opinion, which could also extend to weekends or possibly after hours. It is very important that you reply to your translators' questions as much as possible. It could make the final translations even clearer than the original and also avoid issues further down the line when the member states will be reviewing your translations. And another matter relating to communication is that of pipeline. Awareness of pipeline greatly differs between departments and companies, but planning the stages of a centralized procedure alongside your LSP can help avoid supply chain bottlenecks and even ensure that any preparatory work can be done in advance of official submission dates. On average, there are 2.5 variations per product submitted per year. But as an LSP, we obviously have little say in the strategy behind these applications. So please do consider advising your LSP on your submission calendar in advance, wherever this is possible. This will help ensure that resources are available, and from an LSP's point of view, this could also mean that in cases of variations, the same linguists can be booked to work throughout the life cycle of the product and ensure consistency and greater knowledge in the product. And that's particularly important over holidays periods, for example, Christmas. We have had several instances where the CHMP opinion was issued just before Christmas, and our clients needed, of course, support with the assessment of the member state, comments over the Christmas break. So make sure that your LSP can support you over the holiday periods. DWL routinely supports customers over the period, but of course, it's always good to know in advance what is coming, so we plan ahead.
Mhm. And that involves briefing our translators, doesn't it, that they'll be needed over that period?
Exactly, because they might be on holidays as well.
I know that, that obviously our experienced translators are aware of these timetabling issues and language requirements involved, but I wonder, is there any lack of experience on the part of newer customers that you onboard? Is there a challenge for newcomers to these processes, do you think?
Of course, yes. It is sometimes the case that we work with relative beginners to the process. We do have a track record of successful submissions, and we're used to dealing with the EMA and the member states. But we understand that this might not be the case for all our customers. So as a result, what we see with lack of experience is a reluctance on the part of our clients to either contact the EMA or discuss any matters with the member states, any concerns, for example, they have on the quality of the English file, or any questions for the translations, any objections. I would say one solution to this lack of confidence and experience is to rely on a translation provider with experience in dealing with the member states and a track record in successful submissions. There's really no reason why your LSP can guide your team as to what expectations what the expectations are at each stage in the submission process.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose even if customers are experienced in the processes, staff turnover can be higher in the pharmaceutical industry, or at least we see contracts changing relatively frequently. Does that pose a challenge working with new contacts, and how do you help manage this change or these changes from our side?
That's true indeed. When you have new members of staff or new contracts in place, it makes sense to have a call with your translation provider to mention the history of the product, such as previous variations or any previous translation concerns that might need to be addressed. Our relatively low staff turnover means deeper in-house knowledge of these processes, but also consistency throughout the life cycle of many products that we've worked on over the years. And yeah, this actually brings me to yet another challenge which might come up, especially with lack of experience, which is the version control of the English document. Often the English PI is reviewed internally by our customers. This could involve several people working on the English file simultaneously, resulting in parallel versions. We understand that the timelines are tight for everyone and that different people might be responsible for different aspects of the product information. However, it is advisable that a kind of rota is in place and is being followed, and all changes are inserted in the same file. For example, we have received documents with changes that were not tracked, or changes from previous rounds that were missing. DWL does have an internal version control system. We always analyze the files on receipt. However, it is helpful if our customers have an efficient version control system in place as well, to avoid delays caused by back and forth questions trying to find out which one is the latest version.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Okay, and another key challenge we've got here is managing affiliates and in-country reviews. And that's a common practice, isn't it, that our customers need a local affiliate to be involved in the translation process. It's obviously an important step for many companies, but does that add an extra layer to the translation process? And is that a challenge? And how can our customers manage this more efficiently when it comes to the translations?
Yes, you're right. Managing affiliate reviews is one of the greatest challenges as well. As mentioned earlier, the involvement of local affiliates is a common requirement, particularly for our larger customers with offices in Europe and even all around the world. In general, local teams are asked to review translated materials at various points in the translation workflow. But this is not itself a problem. However, we must be aware that as timelines are squeezed, the extra step in the process can lead to greater pressure or create significant bottlenecks at key stages. So very often, local affiliates are subject matter experts, but they're not translators. And in our experience, they may be susceptible to certain weaknesses such as, for example, little or even no experience with the standard EMA documents and requirements. So they might use out-of-date QD templates or national versions instead of the ones required for centralized procedure, for example. They might not be aware of the IDIQM terminology, MEDRA terminology, even layout guidelines that are available by the EMA. Another thing that might happen with affiliates is that they make preferential or stylistic changes, which could lead to even inserting errors in the translations. And if these are not reviewed by the translator after, they might end up in your final file. And another thing, like we said, they're not part of the workflow, the translation workflow, so they might not be aware how the translation agency works and the tight timelines. So they do not always communicate any changes to the timelines or any delays, which could then have a sort of a domino effect to the rest of the workflow. So to avoid all these complications when working with affiliates, we have found it useful to provide affiliates reviews with guidelines to support their work on the product information that we translate. We have also involved affiliates in our automated workflows in order to integrate them more fully in our workflows and ensure that expectations regarding deadlines and quality are respected. That way, we make the most of their expertise and combined with our linguistic inputs and ensuring that the source text is still translated faithfully. And yeah, at this point, I could also mention, I could also speak about quality. Achieving quality is very important when you deal with product information, as it could be critical for the patient, obviously. But a good quality translation starts from a good quality English source file, which is fully QRD compliant with clear text and clear messages that would then lead to clear and accurate translations. DWL does review and analyze the English source file upon request always, and tries to resolve any possible issues in the English source file well in advance alongside our clients, so we can avoid ending up with unclear translations. We can also check the English file with for QRD compliance, so both template text and QRD layout is transferred over to all the translations. So it would be also advisable to have the English file written or at least reviewed by a native English speaker. And if this is not possible at the client's end, do get in touch with your LSP to have this arranged for you. I'm sure this is something they can do. Now, poor quality English files could also come from reference products or originators. It can be anything from old and overworked documents, old templates or formatting issues, especially if they come like from PDF conversions, like we said earlier. And the same goes for inherited translations, where we may have to deal with mistranslations, incorrect use of templates, or even sometimes there are orthographic changes in some languages that have not been implemented in all the products. That could happen with languages like Portuguese or Romanian. So in instances like that, it would be advisable that the translations undergo a full review. So accuracy, consistency, and QD compliance is ensured. Of course, we do understand that this is up to the EMA to decide, especially if an originator product needs to be reviewed or amended. The advice here would be to do contact the EMA if your LSP advises that the quality of the current translation is poor, and try to discuss possible review of the translations. And speaking about review, I would just like to mention a last aspect here that could possibly cause issues, which is the review by the customers themselves. This topic refers to when clients are trying to review or implement minor changes internally. We understand that you may have people that speak the language, the target language, or internally, but again, not everyone is a translator. We also advise against using online translation tools to review translation, like Google Translate, for instance. We have had several instances where customers inserted critical errors in their attempt to review the translations with little or no linguistic knowledge. A few examples could be, for example, when clients change dates or they try to change numbers, like for instance, the shelf life of a product. Thinking it's just a number, it just doesn't work the same in all languages. We need to keep in mind that every language has a different system and structure. So changing number 3 to number 4, for example, it might be okay in English, but in Slovenian, for instance, there is a declination involved, so the text that follows is also affected. Then German capitalizes all nouns, so putting those in lowercase is a critical error in German. And another example could be even like French, where they use reflexive verbs, which could mean repetition of a reflexive pronoun. To someone who doesn't speak the language, this might be a duplication. This might be an error. This might sound wrong, but it's just the structure of the language. So yes, all these examples are real, that we have received from our customers. And to avoid those, we recommend that even if you want to perform minimal changes like the above, please have your LSP review the translations, just so you avoid them ending up in your final products.
It's understandable, isn't it? Once the deadlines get very tight and you're under pressure, it may seem like a shortcut to make changes yourself, but it's a false economy, isn't it, in the long term, if errors creep in that way.
That's right, because then you will end up either with an incorrect file or spending more time correcting those errors.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Eleni, for that list of challenges. Why don't we move on now to some case studies? So we've looked in general at challenges, but maybe here you could describe some case studies based on real submissions, problems they encountered, and how we tackled them.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to describe a few case studies here with different approaches, just exactly to show that there's no one-size-fits-all approach and that workflows can be adapted depending on clients' requirements. So here we have the first customer. Let's call it customer A. This customer approach was very much hands-on, and to maintain version control, their approach was to protect their files against any form of editing, including identifiable track changes. So they had certain track change username for their track changes to identify any change that was made to the translations. Now, for years, we had to take a creative approach to QC to ensure that the client's procedures were respected. However, this was very time consuming and really counterproductive, and of course more expensive for our clients. We discussed this with our customer and came up with a more efficient approach that we were using with our other customers, which they actually found much more useful, and it's still the way they work, really. And I remember during that meeting with the client, we realized that up to that point, they thought that what they were doing was the norm, but it was actually the exception.
There you go.
So they sometimes they do not realize, they think that everybody works the same way. So it's good to have these discussions because you can share your experience and they can see that there's another way which might be more efficient and also save some costs.
And that was relevant because, as you see here, there were multiple at-risk variations to be combined in the same file. So if it's protected against making identifiable changes, that must be difficult to do.
It was very difficult to handle for the translators. That's right. They were spending hours for even small changes.
Okay, so customer B, affiliate review included in DWL workflow. Can you tell us about this one?
So this customer requires that their local affiliates conduct revision of product information after each update of the translations. DWL has worked very closely with these customers and their affiliates and has set workflows that meet all needs. And we've shared guidelines on PI reviews for the affiliates. Because not all of them are experts, like we mentioned earlier, in handling EMA documents. And we've also included them in our translation management system, which is an automated workflow. So they would receive the files, they could log in into our portal, download the files, they would get reminders when the file should be re-uploaded, and that way they would also stick to the timelines, have the guidelines to review the translations and make sure they stay within the scope of their review.
Very good. Okay, and what about, so yeah, we have linguistic review support here, and there's obviously multiple ways of approaching the linguistic review by member states. So what can you tell us about this one?
Yeah, when we deal with linguistic reviews, which is the assessment of the member state comments, there are usually three scenarios that come up and that we have listed here. So yeah, the first scenario is your LSP is the coordinator only. So your LSP will just coordinate the assessment of member states between the member states and your affiliates. There will be no linguistic involvement from the LSP, and your affiliates will take the place of the translators in the process. These could also include LSP being named as contact on QAD Form 1 when you submit the original translations. So they receive the comments from the member states directly. So basically, just let your LSP be your single point of contact. We don't have to have a linguistic involvement in the process. We can just assist. We're just passing on files between member states and affiliates. The second approach is that the LSP handles the entire linguistic review process. This could basically mean that you can hand over the process to the agency and just simply receive back a QRD Form 2 and a submission-ready package. Your LSP will be the first point of contact for the member states. They will handle the assessment of the member state comments. They will liaise with the member states to reach agreement, and they will send back a submission-ready package as required by the EMA. And they can also do this via UDRLink, so the only thing really for you to do is just forward to the EMA. And then we have the third scenario where your LSP just handles the linguistic matters. Here, the LSP will just handle the assessment of the member state comments, and the customer will liaise with the member states and finalize the files once the wording has been agreed. Customer affiliates may be asked to liaise with the member states if they don't want a single point of contact. So
and do we
these
have
are the three most common scenarios, but again, these can be adjusted to internal workflows, etc.
So DWL's preference would be to handle the whole process from start to finish.
I think it would also take the burden off the shoulders from the clients. They can just rely on the LSP with an LSP with great experience to just handle these and have final translations ready for submission.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Eleni, for that summary. That's brilliant. We can now, I think, move on to a Q&A portion of the webinar. You can see our contact details on screen, so if you prefer to follow up offline, so to speak, you're welcome to do so. I'll just give it a couple of seconds to open the chat. Okay, we have a question. Based on your experience, is there a DWL guideline for affiliates to follow for translation or in-country reviews to minimize said risks? Is this available for your customers?
I think the answer here is yes. We have put together guidelines for affiliates that we share with them, so we avoid exactly all the risks that we listed earlier. So please do get in touch and we can discuss this with you.
It's perhaps worth saying as well, a reminder of how many people are involved in the process, because you've obviously got 24 translators, 24 revisers, and then potentially 24 in-country reviewers working on these translations. So it's a large team of people, isn't it? So got any guides are very useful.
I would think so, even for the translators, that they have great experience in dealing with these documents. They always ask for guidelines for every single product, so they know exactly what they're facing.
Understood.
It will also save them time to go and start researching, even for the affiliates.
Yeah. Okay, I've got another question here. How much time in advance should DWL be notified to be able to support a variation application where a change of PI is envisioned? Well, it's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? I suppose we've certainly been given months worth of notice, but there will be obviously times when there are any when you're notified as the process is beginning that they need our support.
That's right. I mean, as we mentioned, the earlier the better. Even if you don't have a first draft, you can get in touch and give us notice, discuss it with us. Usually a standard PI has up 7,000 to 10,000 words, so we could kind of estimate the timelines and give you some guidance, but as soon as you know that you're heading towards a a centralized procedure, please do get in touch. Yes.
I mean, if you were handling at-risk translations just before the 5-day window, for example, you can take a view as to whether to bundle those changes required for the PI with changes coming from the CHMP. There are ways to problem solve it, aren't there? If we receive any changes, quite close to submission.
Yes, of course. Even availability of translators, because we handle many variations, many submissions every month, and they're constantly working on submissions. So we need to slot them in to be able to meet deadlines, etc.
Yeah. Okay, another question here. What metric is typically used by LSPs to generate costs/quotes for language services on product information for centralized procedures? So on what basis are we forming quotes for this work?
Well, if it's a new product, we quote on number of source words. So you will send us the English file, we will analyze it, and we will send you a quote based on the word count. If it's a variation, we because of the nature of the handling track changes, the cost there, the way we cost it is different. We estimate it on an hourly basis because it's handling track changes. It's not just translating words. It would mean deletions, feedly changes. It could be these could cause formatting changes that we might need to sort out after, and it's more time consuming than having a straightforward text to translate.
That's right. And we can early on in the process provide an estimate for the entire submission, can't we? Once we're in sight of the documents, we can provide you with a quotation for the translations at hand, but we can also, based on experience, estimate the costs for your submission throughout all the stages. Okay.
Yes, usually based on experience, we can assess how many changes usually there will be coming following different stages. So, for example, dealing with certain committees, etc.
Okay. I guess that's it's probably related to a previous question, but how long does it take to translate a PI from scratch? What turnaround time should we expect for a translated PI? It's a difficult one to answer that, isn't it? It's how long is a piece of string? But we generally expect translators to work to around 2,000 words per day for a translation from scratch.
But then we also add time for revision and for QC, and obviously having to deal with 24 languages will take much longer than having to deal with just 1 or 2 languages. So in general, it would take for a whole new product to be translated into 24 languages, I would say between 3 to 4 weeks. But again, it really depends on how technical also the file is, the product. It could be straightforward, but it could be it could be a new product, like a novel, and or there's not much research or information available for the translators, so they might need to do more research.
Okay, I've got another question here. What is your view on providing translations of only portions of a PI, e.g. if translations of only 1 or 2 sentences are required that the client could then insert into the relevant part of the PI? So I suppose that's as opposed to sending your LSP the full document with track changes and having them work in that. Does that ever happen, Eleni? Would you ever receive changes outside of the PI that your customer would then insert themselves?
We have had it, but again, it's something we wouldn't recommend, because we do need, first of all, access to the full product information to use as reference. So we ensure consistency of terminology, even information that might be available that could help the translator. So please do provide the entire PI for reference. And also, it has happened that by copy pasting, you paste it in the wrong part of the document, because simply you don't understand the language, or you might count paragraphs, but you might not insert it in the right place. And it would actually be easier that the translator just inserts it in the actual file, and will save you time from having to copy paste them over 24 times.
Okay, understood. Okay, another question. If a translation program is used in DWL, if a translation program is used in DWL, is the output reviewed by the linguist? How do you manage differences in expertise for the early submission work for things like CMC documents? Well, I suppose this goes back to the point before about selective use of technology. It would not be advisable to have a translation program produce anything that isn't reviewed by a linguist. So, I mean, certainly where the documents we work on are concerned, it all starts and ends with human translators, even though their work is obviously supported now by computer-aided translation tools.
Exactly. So the CAT tools are there to support the translators, and translators are human with experience in handling these documents. We wouldn't use anything that would put patients at risk.
And I suppose we mentioned the roadmap towards machine translation, but even that is performed with human translators reviewing any output. Yeah. Do you keep records of the translation history of the PI over time if needed at any point?
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have access to the history of the product, all products that we have dealt with. So it has happened that our customers have asked for previous documents, or that we have kept notes of changes that need to go into the next variation. So yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay, and can one translate into one language only, e.g. if a product is to be sold in one other country only, or does it have to be into 24 languages? And of course, yes, we've mentioned mainly the centralized procedure in which 24 languages are required. But of course, even for centralized procedures, it may be the case that they only approach an LSP for certain languages amongst the 24, or it might be a national procedure or decentralized procedure where certain languages are bundled together.
Exactly.
I don't know if you have anything else to say on that, Eleni.
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. Well, I think that's all perhaps we have. Oh, sorry, there's one more question. Yes, do you have any experience with veterinary applications? The process is not that different compared to human medicine, but there are some soft skill differences. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And we have a database of translators who are also specialists in veterinary subjects. There are, as you say, specific differences in templates when dealing with veterinary products. I think that's all the questions. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for having joined us today. We've hopefully made you aware of some of the pitfalls along the path to submission in Europe. Contact details were on the screen just now. Don't hesitate to reach out if you require feedback or further clarification on anything that you heard today, or if you have any questions that weren't answered. So thank you very much once again from Eleni and I, and have a good day.